Hello everyone, how's it going? Billy Ballgame here, back with another video. On this channel, I'm just a dude who loves to talk about baseball and baseball cards. And if that sounds like something you're into, it'd be great if you could subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. On today's video, it's kind of going to be a continuation of some of my more recent videos on collecting on a budget. And what I'm going to do on today's video is I'm going to talk about Hall of Fame cards from the early 50s that can be found on a budget. So I started out, I was going to do all of the cards, Topps and Bowman, from 1950 all the way through 1959, but it was just so many cards. And the criteria for this week's video are going to be the same as the last video. It's got to be a collector grade card, and I'm talking about cards from the 50s. So these would be PSA or SGC 5s. Now, for me, I just use that grade as kind of a cutoff point, because if I used any grade, it would just be so many cards to go through. And the video would probably be 4 hours. So for me, I use that cutoff just to make the data and the length of the video something a little bit more manageable. So there were way too many cards to use for the project of this video if I went from 1950 all the way through to 1959. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about just the Topps cards from 1951 to 1955 that are Hall of Famers, that are graded in a PSA or SGC or higher of a 5, and sold for under $100. And I pulled the data back basically to the beginning of March, because again, there was a lot of data. So a lot of you, and this includes me, when I started getting into vintage, I started with the 1960 Topps set because it was something that I felt was difficult but manageable, that it was something that I was going to be able to complete. And pretty much the same, like when I was a kid, I thought cards from the 50s were all super expensive, and those would be cards that I wouldn't be able to afford. When I switched my focus into vintage, I still kind of had that mindset of, you know, the cards from the 50s are really expensive and I will never be able to afford them. And some of them are really expensive that, you know, I may be able to get some someday, you know, a Hank Aaron rookie, stuff like that. But, you know, Mickey Mantle rookie and Willie Mays rookies, those are so expensive that they're nowhere on my radar at this point. But I was surprised when I started pulling the numbers for this video of how many cards are out there from the 50s of Hall of Famers graded in a collector grade that have sold recently for under $100 or right around the $100 range. There were a couple that I went over a little bit on. And again, I used eBay to pull all of these numbers. So I'm going to start with, of course, the 1951 Topps, red backs and blue backs. And these cards used to be pretty cheap. Let's see, you know, the last year or two, or a year or two ago, these cards weren't really expensive. But it seems to me from the cards that sold on eBay that the prices of some of these have gone up. So I was figuring there would be quite a few that would, from these sets, that would fall under this criteria. And I was surprised at how few there are. So the first one is a 1960 or 1951 Topps red back Ralph Kiner. A PSA 5 sold for $57 at auction on March 27th. And there are a lot of these guys, these Hall of Famers, that you'll hear these names frequently throughout this list. Ralph Kiner is one of those guys. His cards are just pretty cheap. Now, if you don't hear a lot of a certain name on this list, it doesn't mean that their cards can't be found reasonably affordably. Guys like Duke Snyder, Yogi Berra, Warren Spahn. It's just at collector grade, most of their cards are over $100. So if those are guys that you're after, like I talked about before, drop down to a 4 or drop down to a 3, they're still going to be nice looking cards, and they're going to be a whole lot cheaper. So again, this video is just to encourage you that are newer collectors, collectors on a budget, or collectors that never thought they'd be able to afford vintage. This is just to give you a little bit of encouragement, to show you that all the cards, even from the 50s, which to me, these are some of the best cards that Topps has ever made, from 1952 to 1955, maybe 1956, are some of the best Topps cards ever, in my opinion. And they're beautiful cards, and some of them are reasonably inexpensive. So again, Ralph Kiner, and then another 1951 Topps Redback, Al Rosen, a PSA 6, sold for $36 on excuse me, on March 22nd. So again, just great cards. And then a Phil Rizzuto, again, 1951 Topps Redback in an SGC 5, sold for $99 on the 29th of February. And that one I went back a little bit further for, just because I thought it was super cool that you could find that early of a card of Phil Rizzuto for under $100. And then I have a bunch of Bowman data on here too that I'm not going to use, just because it'll make this video way too long. So I'm going to stick just to Topps for this video, and then in a future video I'll go back and talk about the Bowman. So 1952 Topps, again, one of the most desirable sets in the history of Topps. And there aren't a lot from this set that fall into this criteria, but there are still a few. So Red Schoendienst, and again, it's one I picked up recently in an SGC 4.5. A PSA 5 sold for $83 on the 2nd of April. And an SGC 5 sold for $75 on the 29th of March. Excuse me once again, sorry about that. So Red Schoendienst is a Hall of Fame player that almost all the way through his career, his cards, for the most part, can be found in that $100 range, other than his rookie card. But for you Cardinals fans, Red Schoendienst is one of the guys that stick out to our head as one of the greats of the franchise. Maybe not, one of the greatest players, even though he's in the Hall of Fame, but just his managing and coaching, like he was involved in the Cardinals organization for probably 40 or 50 years, if not longer. And then we have a 52 Topps Richie Ashburn in a PSA 5, sold on March 13th for $105. And again, Richie Ashburn is one of those guys that is pretty inexpensive for a Hall of Famer. And then this is an amazing card, 1952 Topps Johnny Mize, a PSA 5, sold on March 10th for $114. And I really like the looks of the 52 Topps Johnny Mize card. And he's in a Yankees uniform on this card, for those of you that are familiar with or aren't familiar with it. But he's in the Hall of Fame as a Cardinal. And to me, he's just one of the greats. But I really like his 52 Topps card. And then we have a fairly recent Hall of Famer, a 1952 Topps Gil Hodges in a PSA 5, sold for $119 on March 1st. And again, these cards, I'm going to, take the screenshots of eBay and add them on the screen while I'm going through this video. And then, okay, so that's it for the 52 Topps. Now, again, this is going back to the beginning of March. So there may be more out there that I'm not aware of. I just didn't, go infinity on eBay pulling up all the old sales. So if there are players, again, that you like, just because they're not on this list doesn't mean that you can't afford them. Just go search the recent sales on eBay for your specific player in the specific grade that you're looking at, and they may be there. So I'll skip through 52 Bowman. All right, so 1953 Topps. Again, this is an amazing set to me, one of my favorites of all time, and there were quite a few on this list from the 53 Topps set. And so again, you've got Red Schoendienst, a PSA 6 sold for $81 on April 4th. Because just again, Red Schoendienst is really cheap. And then the next one, again, we'll repeat some of these names. 53 Topps Johnny Mize in a PSA 5 sold for $62 on April 4th. 53 Topps, again, we have a George Kell. A lot of his Bowman in the early 50s are cheap, but his 53 Topps sold for $62 in a PSA 5 on April 1st. And then this may be the topic of a future video, but why does the hobby not like pitchers? Like, the next one up is a 53 Topps early win. Now, Hall of Famer, 300 game winner, early win, just one of the greats. An SGC 5 sold for $69 on March 19th. And again, it's a great card. I really, really enjoy the 53 Topps set. And again, I don't have very many cards from the 50s just because, like I said, when I was younger, I thought they were all really expensive. There was no way I'd be able to afford them. Then when I switched back to collecting vintage here, a few years ago, I still had that mindset and started with the 60 set. But as I've done more research and done more digging, I realized that some of these 50s cards are actually really affordable. So at some point, I'll start moving back and getting, rookie cards of like, Harmon Killebrew's not super expensive, Al Kaline's not super expensive, and then get some of the Hall of Famer cards, that are relatively affordable for me with my budget. So that was early win. So, Ralph Kiner. Okay. So next we have a 53 Topps Ralph Kiner in a PSA 5 sold for $57 on March 10th. And again, some of these are low-level Hall of Famers, but they're still Hall of Famers. And these cards are 70 years old. And then we have Enos Slaughter, again, a Cardinals Hall of Famer, in a PSA 6, sold for $89 on March 10th. And again, just a great looking card. And again, there are more that were close. Like even Bob Feller, in a 5, he was more than $100. But in a 3 or a 4, he would be really close to that $100 range. So maybe if you're looking to add a nice Bob Feller to your collection, maybe 53 Topps is one you would want to look at. All right, and then next we have, that's back to Bowman. So 54, now we're moving to 54 Topps. And again, just one of my favorite sets of all time. We've got a 54 Gil Hodges in a PSA 6, sold for $113 on April 5th. And again, just a great looking card. Like, if you pinned me down and told me I had to tell you what my favorite top set was of all time, this would probably be my pick. Like, I really love the 54 top set. And then next we have Richie Ashburn, SGC 5, sold for $52 on April 4th. And then next we have Phil Rizzuto in an SGC 5, sold for $76 on April 3rd. So again, some of these names are going to repeat, but then once we get later in the list, we'll come into some new names. And once we get later into the 50s, we'll have some new names pop up on here as well. And then next we have Hoyt Wilhelm, a PSA 5, sold for best offer of less than $55 on April 3rd. And that's another really great looking 54 tops card of Hoyt Wilhelm. Another great looking card. Again, you can tell I may be a little bit biased toward this set, but Duke Snider sold in a PSA 5 for $119 on April 1st. And that one, again, is, you'll see it on the picture, just green background, just an amazing card. And then next we have Whitey Ford, light blue background, another awesome card. Whitey Ford in a PSA 5 sold for $94 on March 29th. And again, just a great card. And I remember when I was younger, like in the Beckett, Sandy Koufax and Whitey Ford were pretty similar as far as prices go. And I would say probably Warren Spahn too. Like, as far as pitchers go, like, they were some of the bigger guys from the vintage era. But, you know, here, since I've gotten back into everything, like Warren Spahn and Whitey Ford, like, those guys are super affordable. Sandy Koufax is still a little bit of expensive, but relative to Whitey Ford and Warren Spahn and some of those other just great Hall of Fame pitchers, like, Sandy Koufax is way more than them, but the rest of them are pretty cheap. So again, in 1954 tops, we've got Monty Irvin in a PSA 5, sold for $87 on March 25th. So Monty Irvin is another guy that got into the Hall of Fame here recently. That is relatively inexpensive. And then this is an inner circle Hall of Famer, you know, without a doubt, this next guy, Eddie Matthews. A PSA 5 sold for $120 on March 24th. And again, Eddie Matthews was overshadowed by Hank Aaron for most of his career, but there's nobody on earth that could say Eddie Matthews is a borderline Hall of Fame type of player. And then another name, again, that we'll come across a few times is Warren Spahn. A PSA 5 sold for $90 on March 19th. And again, Warren Spahn, I would hate to have to pick who's the best left-handed pitcher of all time, but, you know, Sandy Koufax would be up there, Warren Spahn would be up there, Steve Carlton would be up there, and then, of course, Randy Johnson, a lot of people would consider the best left-handed pitcher of all time. So Warren Spahn is in the top 5 of best left-handed pitchers of all time. You can buy a 54 tops in a PSA 5 for $90. And that's just, that's absurd to me. And then, all right, the last year that I'm covering on this video, we have 1955 tops. We have Monty Irvin in a PSA 5, sold for $45 on April 14th. Like, let's think about this. It costs $25 to grade a card with PSA right now. So you're looking at, what, $20 for a Monty Irvin 1955 tops. It's crazy. And then next we have Al Rosen in an SGC 6.5, sold for $55 on April 14th. And I think Al Rosen has been on the list a few times because he's one of those guys that are pretty cheap. Al Rosen, Richie Ashburn, they're not very expensive at all. And then some of these guys, like I said, if they're not on here, like Roy Campanella, there were some of his cards that in a 5 were about $200 or so. So if you went to a 3 or a 4, that would drop it really close to $100. And Roy Campanella, you know, is really one of those desirable vintage players to collect. Some of these other guys may not be, but to me, that's just an opportunity to get a Hall of Famer really cheap. And then Hal Newhouser, again, not an upper level Hall of Famer, but look how expensive his 48 leaf rookie card is, or his 49 leaf rookie card is. So you can get a PSA 5 for $36 for Hal Newhouser. It's sold on April 14th. And then again, Eddie Matthews is back again. So his 55 tops in a PSA 5 sold for $99 on April 14th. And then again, here comes Warren Spahn. An SGC 5 sold for $79 on March 31st. So that's 27 cards of Hall of Famers from the 50s that you can pick up for less than $100. And again, if you drop that grade from, you know, a 5 to a 3 or a 4, you know, you'd be surprised at what players that you could pick up. You can get Yogi Berra. I already touched on Roy Campanella. So you can get into some of those upper level Hall of Famers, not just the low level guys like, you know, Ralph Kiner and George Kell and stuff, right? So, and then if you know what you're doing, buying raw cards, ungraded cards, then you can get those extremely cheap. And if you buy a nice ungraded version, then you pay 15 or 25 bucks to send it in to get graded. And then you might have a really nice PSA or SGC 5 or 6 of a card that you may have $75 or so into, and then you sent it in to get graded. It comes back as a 5 or 6. Depending on who it is you buy, you might have a $200 or $300 card. So that's definitely another way to go about building your collection on a budget if you know what you're doing. So I guess I'll wrap it up with that. Everybody, thank you for your support once again. Thank you for watching this video. If you're still with me, give it a thumbs up if you would. Give me your thoughts on some of these cards that are selling here recently for so cheap. And then let me know if you want me to continue moving forward in the 50s with Topps cards, or if you want me to go back and do the 50 Bowman and move forward with those up until 55 Bowman. Because I'm going to do probably both of those. It's just a matter of which one comes next and which one you guys like the idea of the most. So again, I appreciate everybody's support. I hope you have a good one. And until the next time, I'll talk to you later.